My friends, there is a truth few dare to confront, yet it shapes the very foundation of your psyche. You will never truly heal until you face what your mother became in your unconscious mind. This is not about blame. It is not about rewriting the past. It is about illumination. The courageous act of turning inward and shining a light on what you carry without even knowing it. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Today, we break that fate. Let us journey together into 5 soul-shaking revelations that you must face. Not only to understand your mother, but to liberate the self that was hidden beneath her shadow. Your mother is your first mirror, but not the final one. Before you even knew what a self was, she reflected something back to you. Her eyes, her tone, her touch. All of it taught you whether you were safe, whether you were lovable, whether the world was a place that welcomed you or rejected you. You did not come into this life with words or beliefs. You came in as pure presence, and her presence began to shape yours. If she held you with warmth, you learned that connection was safe. If she withdrew when you cried, you learned to bury your needs. If she was unpredictable, you learned to scan the emotional weather before daring to exist freely. And here's the profound truth. These lessons become invisible lenses through which you see the world. And yourself. For years, even decades. Most people never question this mirror. They walk through life reacting to shadows, interpreting every relationship, every failure, every success through the silent blueprint their mother gave them. If she was emotionally unavailable, they chase love like a ghost. If she was overly critical, they become perfectionists, never feeling good enough. And if she was wounded and never healed, they may carry her pain as if it were their own burden to bear. But here's the awakening: that first mirror is not the final truth. At some point in your journey, you must look again. You must step away from the mirror she gave you and ask, who am I really? Not the child who longed to please her, not the rebel who tried to escape her, but the self that exists beneath all of that. You see, healing begins when you stop mistaking the reflection for reality. It begins when you realize that the image of yourself you inherited was not always accurate. It was filtered through her traumas, her unspoken fears, her unmet dreams. You might have mistaken her anxiety for your own. You might have thought her silence was your shame. But those were not yours to carry. When you recognize this, something sacred happens. You begin to reclaim the right to see yourself clearly. You begin to become the mirror you never had. A mirror of compassion. A mirror of strength. A mirror that says, I am not broken. I'm becoming. And in that moment, not in blame, not in bitterness, but in clarity, you begin to outgrow the first mirror. You step beyond the story you inherited and into the life you are meant to create. That is the beginning of true freedom. The voice inside your head that tells you're not good enough, that you shouldn't try, that you'll never be loved unless you earn it. It's often not your voice at all. It is the echo of a wound. And more often than we like to admit, that wound was carved in our earliest relationship, the one with our mother. When we speak of the mother wound, we are not accusing or condemning. We are naming a reality, a psychological inheritance passed down, often unconsciously, from mother to child. This wound is not always born of abuse or neglect. Sometimes it comes from a mother who loved deeply but was never taught how to express it. A mother who was present but emotionally unavailable. A mother who was afraid, anxious, or burdened by her own unmet needs. Regardless of how it formed, the wound has one universal consequence: it creates an inner voice that mimics the fear and pain you witnessed, even if it was never spoken aloud. Perhaps your mother never said the words, "You're not enough." But maybe she flinched when you expressed big emotions. Maybe she praised your achievements more than your being. Maybe she withdrew when you were most vulnerable. And in your child mind, you drew conclusions. I must be too much. I must be a problem. I must stay small to be loved. These beliefs settle into your unconscious, and over time, they become a familiar script. That script grows into a critic. A quiet but persistent whisper that judges doubts and sabotages. You hear it when you hesitate to speak your truth. You feel it when you shrink in relationships. You obey it when you silence your desires and call it humility. The inner critic wears many masks. It may sound like discipline. It may disguise itself as humility, modesty, or realism. But beneath the surface, it is the internalized voice of fear, a survival mechanism forged in the earliest moments of your life, when you needed love to feel like you mattered. And here's the painful paradox: you may cling to this voice because it feels safe, familiar, even loving. It reminds you of her, and so letting it go feels like betraying her. But healing demands that you distinguish between love and loyalty to pain, between honoring her experience and continuing to suffer from it. To heal the mother wound is not to silence the inner critic with force, but to turn toward it with understanding. To ask it, whose voice are you? What are you trying to protect me from? Often, you'll find that the critic is not your enemy. It is a frightened protector, echoing the rules you once followed to earn acceptance. And when you meet it with compassion, something shifts. The critic softens, the voice becomes quieter, space opens. In that space you begin to hear a different voice. A quieter, wiser one. A voice that says you are allowed to rest, that your worth is not measured by how small you make yourself, that love is not something you must prove. This is where true healing begins. Not by erasing the past, but by rewriting the present with awareness. The mother wound may have given birth to the inner critic, but your consciousness, your courage to face it, can become the voice of inner healing. You are not your mother's fear. You are not her silence. You are not her sorrow. You are the one who gets to choose a new voice. There are parts of yourself you hide, suppress, or outright reject. Not because they are wrong, but because at some point, you learned they were unsafe to express. This is the essence of the shadow, and when it comes to the mother, that shadow runs deep. Whether we acknowledge it or not, the unhealed, unspoken, and unresolved aspects of our mother's life often find their way into our unconscious. They become part of us, not through intention, but through inheritance. As children, we are porous. We absorb everything, not just our mother's words and actions, but her moods, her silences, her longings, her disappointments. If your mother carried unexpressed grief, you likely felt its weight without knowing its source. If she suppressed her anger to keep peace, you may have learned to fear your own rage. If she felt powerless, you may now shrink from your own strength. This isn't imitation. It's psychic transmission. It's the silent passing down of wounds that were never given language. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow as the parts of the self that are denied or hidden away because they don't fit the image we or society want to maintain. But he also knew that shadow is not just personal. It is generational. And the shadow of the mother is often the first one we inherit. You might find yourself living her patterns without realizing it. Maybe you sabotage your relationships the way she once did. Maybe you choose safety over joy, following an emotional map she never dared to question. Maybe you fear being too much, or not enough, because she lived in that same tension, never feeling quite right in her own skin. Her shadow, unmet and unloved, may now live in you, and you mistake it for your identity. But it isn't you. It is the part of you that's loyal to her pain, the part that says, if I suffer like she did, I will feel closer to her. Or, if I suppress this part of myself, maybe I won't make the same mistake she did. This unconscious loyalty is powerful, but is not freedom. It is not wholeness, and it is not love. To face the shadow of the mother is not to judge her. It is to witness her, to see her not only as a parent, but as a woman who was shaped by her own unmet needs, her own unlived life, her own lineage of pain. When you recognize that, you can begin to untangle what is truly yours from what was passed down. You can look at your own anger and say, this is not dangerous. This is human. You can feel your desires and say, this is not selfish. This is sacred. You can speak your truth and say, this is not betrayal. This is healing. A shadow work is not about becoming someone new. It's about reclaiming who you were before the fear took hold, before the silence became a strategy, before the inherited pain became your truth. And as you begin to integrate what was hidden, you stop carrying her burdens as your own. You stop repeating her fears as if they're prophecies. You begin to live, not just in reaction to her story but in authorship of your own. That is the great turning point. That is the alchemy of consciousness. Not just to love your mother, but to liberate yourself from her unspoken pain. Not to reject her, but to release what was never yours to hold. And in doing so, you do not break the bond. You redeem it. You heal backward and forward. You become the place where the shadow ends and the light begins. Forgiveness is one of the most misunderstood and misused concepts in healing. So often, we equate it with reconciliation, with restoring a relationship, with pretending that the pain never happened. We imagine that to forgive is to absolve the other person, to invite them back into our lives, to smile through gritted teeth and call it peace. But that is not forgiveness. That is performance. That is self-abandonment. True forgiveness, deep, soul-level forgiveness, is not about the other person at all. It is not about whether your mother ever said, "I'm sorry," or whether she ever acknowledged the ways she hurt you. It is not about whether she changed. It is about whether you are willing to release the hold that her actions or inactions still have over your heart. Forgiveness is not the closing of your eyes. It is the opening of them. It is the courage to see everything clearly. What was done, what was missing, what you deserved and never received, and to feel the full weight of it. And then, from that place of honesty and clarity, to choose not to carry it any longer. You see, when you don't forgive, you stay tethered. You remain psychically enmeshed with the person who hurt you. Your identity becomes shaped around the wound. You live your life either in resistance to her or in desperate hope that she will become what you needed her to be. But both paths keep you bound to the past. Both paths rob you of your freedom. Forgiveness is the quiet, defiant act of saying, "I will no longer shape my life around the injury." It is not weakness. It is not forgetting. It is a reclaiming of power. It is looking at the pain and saying, "This was real, and it changed me, but it will not define me." You can forgive without speaking to her again. You can forgive and still honor your boundaries. You can forgive and never forget. Because forgiveness does not mean she was right. It means you are ready to be free. There is a strange intimacy in forgiveness, not with the other person, but with yourself. It asks you to be honest about what you feel, to grieve what was lost, to stop waiting for an apology that may never come, and to give yourself the closure you always hoped would come from someone else. That's the paradox. You think you're waiting on them, but the door to your freedom has always been in your own hands. And let us not forget, some mothers were so wounded themselves. They could not love without conditions. They could not see you clearly, because they were still lost in their own shadow. They could not hold your emotions because they were drowning in their own. To forgive does not mean you excuse this. It means you no longer let their limitations become your inheritance. It means you let go, not for them, but for your own becoming. Because the truth is this: the pain you don't forgive becomes the chain you drag through your future. It becomes the bitterness that leaks into your joy, the mistrust that poisons your relationships, the fear that silences your voice. But forgiveness, that is the key that unlocks the cage. That is the quiet revolution of the soul. It is how you rise without revenge, how you love without losing yourself, how you walk forward, lighter, wiser, whole. Not because she changed, not because it didn't hurt, but because you chose liberation over legacy, because you finally realized that freedom is not something she can give you. It is something you give yourself. You are not your mother's story. You are your own becoming. This is one of the most vital truths you will ever have to face on your journey of healing. It may sound simple, but it is not easy. Because so much of who you think you are has been shaped, molded, and unconsciously defined by the story your mother lived. Her beliefs about the world, her fears, her unhealed wounds, her vision of love, her silence, sacrifices, her sadness, all of it became the soil in which your early sense of self was planted. But here's what you remember: soil is not destiny. It is the beginning, not the end. When you were born, you did not arrive into an empty field. You arrived into her world, into her past, into her unfinished dreams and inherited burdens. You absorbed her energy before you ever formed your own words. You noticed how she responded to your needs. Whether she smiled when you reached for her, whether she turned away, whether she met your emotions with presence or discomfort. You learned very early what parts of you were welcomed, and which ones made her flinch. And slowly, without knowing it, you shaped yourself accordingly. Maybe you became the caretaker, the achiever, the peacemaker. Roles she needed, but that cost you your authenticity. Maybe you internalized her scarcity, her survival mindset, her idea that life was hard and joy was rare. Maybe you watched her silence herself in the face of love, and you thought that was what strength looked like. Or maybe you saw her rage, her bitterness, her sadness, and vowed you would never become like her, only to find her patterns living inside you anyway. This is what it means to be entangled in your mother's story. Not just through memory, but through identity. And yet, there comes a moment when the soul whispers, "This is not mine. This pair. This smallness. This shame. This does not belong to me. That is the beginning of your becoming. To become is to step beyond the inherited script. It is to question the rules you were taught before you had the power to choose. It is to realize that love does not require loyalty to suffering. That honoring your mother's humanity does not mean repeating her story. That you are allowed to live in joy even if she could not. That you can be different without betraying her. You were born through her, but you were not born to be her. Her limitations do not define your potential. Her silence does not define your voice. Her heartbreak does not define your future. You may carry parts of her laughter, her resilience, her strength, and still be entirely your own. Because to break the cycle is not to reject her. It is to fulfill what she couldn't, to evolve what was stagnant, to give voice to what she buried, to live a life that would have made her soul breathe deeper, had she known how. You are not here to finish her unlived life. You are here to begin your fully lived one. This is the sacred invitation of individuation to separate, not in bitterness, but in purpose. To say, I see you, I honor your journey, and now I must walk my own. And you will still feel her inside you at times. In your choices, in your fears, in your longing. But with every conscious step, you will begin to make space between the echo of her story and the truth of your own. That space is where you bloom. That space is where you write the next chapter, not as a reaction to her, but as a revelation of you. You are not your mother's story. You are your own becoming. And that becoming is sacred, sovereign, and unstoppable. The mother archetype is one of the most powerful forces in the human soul. But even the most sacred image must be examined. If not, it becomes a chain instead of a root. You cannot ascend if part of you is still trapped in the basement of your childhood. So, I ask you today, what are you still protecting her from inside yourself? What do you need to grieve that you never received? What truth about your mother have you been too afraid to face? Because when you face it, not with blame, but with awareness, you heal not just yourself but the generations before and after you. This is the path of the awakened. This is the fire of individuation. This is your liberation.